Without further ado, Secretary Cisneros.
Kelly, thank you very much. Thanks for your warm introduction. Thank you for the participation of Home Depot in this effort. And thank you most importantly for the good work that you and the Home Depot Foundation have done over the years. It is true we're working on a project together now focusing on the housing aspect of the aging demographic in the United States, which is going to be a huge issue as the majority of people want to stay in their home, but their homes are not necessarily the right fit for them, and how we make that adjustment in the present housing stock and in the housing that's yet to come. So thank you very much to Home Depot for that. I also want to thank you for introducing me here and actually getting my name correct. That's a rare treat for me. The farther I come from San Antonio, my name is Cisneros, pronounced with a Spanish accent. It is Cisneros, but I promise you it is not the things I've been called, like the time I was introduced as Henry Cisneros. Another time, absolutely true, I spoke to a medical group, and I guess they must have been studying rare diseases or something, you know, in the weekend before I arrived. But it was a Monday morning. I was the mayor of San Antonio, went over to welcome this group and to the convention center. And I noticed that the presenter was having a real hard time getting through the introduction. And then it dawned on me what the problem was. It's real difficult to introduce somebody and never mention their name. Until the moment of truth, he could avoid it no longer. He said, "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mayor Sclerosis." So after you've been introduced as a disease to a group of doctors, you think it's the worst, but there was actually one worse. I was secretary of HUD, used to have to go over to the National Press Club to deliver what they call the State of the City address. And on this particular occasion, I went back to the office. A lady called, and I guess she must have had some, it was carried on C-SPAN, and she must have had some, you know, kind of ethnic inspiration or something. She said, I want to speak to the secretary. I don't think I can pronounce his name, but it's something like cheese nachos. So, Kelly, thank you. Thank you for everything, including getting the name correct. It's a treat to be in Atlanta. I've been here many, many times over the years. In the years that I was HUD Secretary, I visited over 200 different American cities, but we calculated which I visited the most, and Atlanta was right there near the top, along with Chicago and Philadelphia, because in those days we were working through housing, public housing issues here in Atlanta, and I was secretary in the years leading up to the Olympics, and so a lot of work was done here in the urban development area of public support for preparation for the Olympics. I've always admired Atlanta, grew up in public service with the lore of Mayor Hartsfield and that era when Atlanta was working its way through the difficult issues of the civil rights era. And Mayor Hartsfield and a group of African-American ministers created that sort of unforgettable theme, Atlanta, a city too busy to hate. And it brought this city through. When I was a young lieutenant in the Army at Fort Benning down in Columbus, I'd come up on weekends to campaign for a young man that the whole country had its eye on, and that was Maynard Jackson, who was running for mayor at the time, and of course won and had a glorious couple of tenures. Andy Young in between, who was a dear, dear friend, one of the people I respect most in public life. So I go back a long way with Atlanta. The last time I was here in the Carter Center was as secretary when President Carter called me down, and as was he, you know, even though President Clinton was the president, President Carter was directing the Secretary of Housing for what he would do in Atlanta. And he made it very clear in that setting, Mr. Secretary, you can do this. I know you have the money to do this. And so we did. And so a lot of great things came out of that period, including the commitment to Hope 6, the renovation of the most deteriorated public housing in the country. And let me just say, without any reservation whatsoever, absolute truth, no city in America has done it better than the Atlanta Public Housing Authority and Renee Glover. which now has the distinction, only city I know of in the country, of having eliminated all of the traditional public housing projects and replaced them with a mixed income, less dense, integrated with Section 8 system. And I know it's generated controversy from time to time, and it's not perfect, but I'm going to tell you, across America, there isn't another city that has done what Atlanta has done. And you have a national heroine. As somebody said the other day, the opposite of a hero is a shero. In any event, you have one of those in Renee Glover. She's a real national treasure. Well, as a national leader in growth, which Atlanta has been, including the international role for Atlanta, there's no question that Atlanta has been touched by the housing turndown. It's not the same effect as in other places, as in the Rust Belt, where the form has taken the turndown is the result of a dramatically depressed economy and no job creation, or in Arizona or Nevada or the West. People have referred to those as the sand states because of the vast overbuilding that occurred there. The epicenter of the housing crisis has been Phoenix, Las Vegas, the Inland Empire of Los Angeles, California, and Florida. And Atlanta has escaped that level of impact. It's going to take years and years to come back, but there's no question that the effect has been serious. Atlanta, after all, led the country in housing starts in the years leading up to the recession. So there's no question a city that is that, quote, exposed, metro area that's that exposed, is going to be damaged. Atlanta, in effect, succumbed to a larger national contagion. Now, there are those who would say that the problem of the housing crisis was rooted in the effort to create more home ownership. I don't think that's correct, and this is not the place to debate that. I'd love the opportunity to lay out my case at some point. It is true that we looked at the long-term expansion of the 1990s and tried to make it work for average folks in a way that we thought would be very powerful, which is to bleed over into home ownership, to create and generate more home ownership. But I'll be honest with you, I think what happened was a whole series of factors converged, some of them malicious and malign, right, on purpose, conscious, and resulted in the housing crisis as we know it, in effect, a hijacking of home ownership. And let me just describe what some of those factors were. We were living in a world awash with capital to be placed somewhere, petrodollars, Chinese dollars, etc., exacerbated by the United States having kept interest rates low for a long time after the dot-com boom. And Alan Greenspan, today acknowledges that he probably kept interest rates too low for too long. Wall Street recognized the opportunity and started to create a series of vehicles, collateralized debt obligations, special investment vehicles that would capture mortgages that were being securitized long before this, but go deeper into the pool of potential buyers because in this world awash with capital, there were buyers for the mortgages. So they, in effect, put themselves in a position of sort of being the pass-through for mortgages, and we're saying to people at the local level, just get us more. It doesn't matter the quality. We're not going to hold on to them. Just get them more and we'll pass them on. And they passed them on to the German retirement system and Chinese social security system. And we know that communities in Iceland went bankrupt buying these instruments, these devices. Wall Street was further encouraged by the compensation system that said your bonus is going to be based on how much of this you pass, literally how much you pass through and how much money you generate for the big companies this way. We know what it meant for them in the long run and their balance sheets, but at the local level, what it generated was a whole series of actors who had no business being in the housing field. They'd been doing other things and just recognized the ease of coming into real estate and real estate brokerage and mortgage finance, and so you had people offering all kinds of unconscionable products. no documents, no stated income, crossed the line from subprime to predatory and brought people into home ownership who, frankly, we know now, in many cases, had no capacity to be there. In effect, the logic changed from a system based on providing capital for people who could pay it back to one in which the logic was, it doesn't matter whether they can pay it back. And it really doesn't even matter whether they can stay in the house. It's a matter of getting the paper and moving the paper on through the system. The ratings agencies collaborated in the process by putting AAA bond ratings on all of that, including tranches that were very, very risky, very, very toxic. And the government regulators stood by and watched the process happen. For example, had the opportunity to rein in derivatives and chose not to, derivatives that were being used as hedges against this and made the whole system sort of work. So it was a witch's brew, a convergence of things that created immense problems. We're now working our way through this, but when we look back at the worst of it, just 20 months ago, the end of, or at the beginning or first quarter, let's say, of 2008, we had just come through a quarter with the sharpest decline in American GDP since 1945 and a spike in job losses in the previous 6 months that was the worst since the Great Depression. Now, President Obama came to office and initiated a program. Many today look back at it and say it was not adequate in one form or another, but at least in fairness, we can describe the elements. It had 5 elements. The first was the stimulus, 5% of GDP in a series of cuts for consumers, assistance to local governments to keep teachers and firemen and policemen on the job, and road programs and infrastructure programs had huge effect, and it's still working because a lot of those programs are only now coming to construction and so forth, so those dollars are still working in the economy. The other element, a second element, was the rescue of the banks. Now, most economists agree this was critical. The TARP program that put capital into the banks, the stress tests, after the loss of Bear Stearns and then Lehman, the country was right on the edge of disaster, potentially another Great Depression. And most analysts agree the bank initiatives were important. A third was the passage of financial regulation, which at least keeps the problems that caused this from happening again very easily by dealing with too big to fail issues and putting in place a consumer protection regime and so forth. The fourth element was global assistance to help countries that were right on the edge, and we know that that hasn't ended because we've watched this summer Greece, then this fall Ireland, and now Spain and Portugal on the edge. But it was very important to provide capital in global markets at a critical time. And then the fifth element was housing. The housing recovery program that took the form of, for example, the first-time homebuyer program, which I think was helpful in keeping the housing production going at some level, and foreclosure mitigation. I'm a supporter of President Obama and his administration, my successor, Sean Donovan, but I think I can say without being critical, just being analytical, that their success in stemming the foreclosures is not one of the successes of this program. It's been a less effective program than I think the country needed or we would have wanted. And it's very, very serious. As Kelly said a moment ago, it's a very serious problem in the following respects. First of all, it's deadly serious for families whose credit ratings are going to be impacted as they're foreclosed upon, the stability of their own families. The disruption at the family level has been immense. It's a setback. It's a continuing setback for banks that have bad loans in their portfolios, have not been able to get them off their books, therefore they're not able to be in position to lend again, and that capital has been kept out of our system and out of the recovery. It's been a problem for communities